Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I know we'll probably have people continue to join us as we go throughout the meeting. My name is Marissa Cleaver-Womble, Director of Public Information and Partnerships for the Hickman Middle School District. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our third forum about the no tax increase bond that the Board of Education is considering. Tonight we're going to hear from Justice Durham from Hollis and Miller, who's going to talk to us about survey results. Hopefully you all had a chance to fill out the survey about our facilities. That information is going to be very useful as we move forward. A couple housekeeping things. You all should be muted. If you are not muted, please mute yourself so we don't have any background noise, as we have quite a few people who are on the Zoom meeting. There will come a time during Justin's presentation that we will take questions. At that time, you can unmute yourself to ask a question. But in the meantime, please stay on mute and we appreciate it. So before we hear from Justin, I am going to turn it over to our interim superintendent, Dr. Carl Skinner, for a welcome. Dr. Skinner.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for joining this Zoom meeting to discuss the no tax increase bond. This bond is going to be on our August 4th ballot. This bond is needed because we have several buildings that have many needs throughout our district. And again, I appreciate everybody joining because we definitely want to hear from the community. That's why Ms. Womble just talked about the fact we had a survey that we had posted last month. And I know Justin is going to be sharing the results of that survey and leading a discussion. Before I turn it over to Justin, I do want to recognize I did see a few board members on. I can't tell who everybody is, but I'd like to take this time to thank President Briggs and Vice President Reagan and any other board members that may be present. I know they work diligently to support the efforts of the school district and our families, especially during this time of the pandemic. So again, I appreciate everything the board does and I appreciate everything you do as we work together as a team to get through this difficult and unprecedented time. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Justin.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Skinner. Well, I'm Justin Durham, architect with Hollis and Miller, and I'm working with the Hickman Middle School District on a long-range plan and some planning for the no tax increase bond issue that we're going to look at going for possibly in August. So tonight, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you guys can see our presentation, and we'll kind of walk through this evening. So hopefully everyone can now see my screen. So this is our third community forum. We were supposed to be at Warford Elementary this evening, but because of our, as Dr. Skinner said, our unprecedented situation right now, we are doing this virtually. So I thought it was a great way to keep the process moving forward, and I'm excited to have you all join tonight and see our presentation. So with that being said, the first thing that we wanted to talk about this evening was the results and the feedback that we got from our online survey we put out. So just to let you guys know, we ended up with around 193 responses from our staff and just over 30 responses by community members. So that is a really good turnout. It gave us a really good cross-section of data that we can use to help us as we start to move forward and prioritize how we would like to allocate the $30 million of potential bond funds that we will have for this bond issue. So I wanted to go through and just highlight some of the feedback that we got and where that came from. So you'll see here that these are the schools and the number of participants that we were able to gather from each location. So you can see here what this represents is that we did get a good cross-section of the district. We got feedback from every building and good feedback from every building. You'll notice that we had quite a bit more feedback from Ruskin High School than the others. That's simply because that is the largest school within the district, and that is not uncommon to get a little bit of additional feedback from the high school level. But you guys can see here that we got good feedback from all locations, so that gives us a cross-section of data. As we walk through, we're going to go through in the order of the questions that were asked in the online survey, and I'll kind of help disseminate kind of what the results were and what these colors and numbers truly mean. So that we're going to talk about our drop-off, pickup, and some of our parking lot needs as we go forward. So what to look for here is we're really looking for that green, which means it's great. If we get a lot of those responses, that means that the community and the staff feels that these things are in really good condition and we don't really need to do anything to them. They're good as they sit. On the other side of the spectrum, we're really looking for that teal color and that orange color on the far right of the graph. And what that means is it needs some improvement or needs major improvement. So when we start to see a lot of greens that says that we're in good shape, great shape, you know, those are things that we may push a little bit lower to the priority list as we go through. But when on the other end, when we see a lot of the orange and the teal on the far right side of our graph, those are things that are probably going to tend to rise a little bit higher in the priority list as we move forward. So the first one that you see here is the graph of our drop-off and pickup zones. And this was just quite simply, you know, how do you feel the drop-off and pickup zones work? What are their condition, et cetera. And you can see here that in several of the schools, we got pretty decent feedback. We got a lot of blues. That gold in the middle means average, so that's right in the middle. They didn't like it or dislike it. So you can see there that Irvin scored a 10. So a lot of people thought, you know what, it's not so pretty big parking lot. It works pretty well for the function. But when you move down to Ruskin High School down there at the bottom of the graph, you can see that we got a lot of feedback that said it needs some help and needs some improvement. And that's not a surprise. That's something that has been on our radar for quite some time at Ruskin. The next question we ask is, how is the daily parking? So this would be parking for staff, our visitors, those people that come to the buildings on a daily basis. And so as you can see, the district graded out fairly well in this one. We didn't get a lot of negative feedback. Everyone seemed to think that the district in a whole did pretty well, except for, again, those daily parking needs at Ruskin High School do need to be addressed. Now, the next question was about event parking, and this one is a very tough question, especially when we're talking about our elementary schools. I have an architect on my staff, Grant Tommy, and he kind of equates this question to building a church for Easter, right? So this would be making sure that we have enough parking and accommodations to, at the elementary level, facilitate those third, fourth, fifth grade programs that we have once or twice a year, maybe a kindergarten graduation or a Donuts with Dads or Milk with Moms or some morning program. Because typically in our elementary locations, those parking lots fill up very quickly and they start to overflow and we get some people being pushed out on the streets or maybe around the neighborhood just because. So that is pretty common. But again, as you go down, when we start talking more about the high school level, the high school level would be more in terms of event parking for basketball games, volleyball games, football games, track, those kind of things. And again, you can see that some of our schools got some of those teals and oranges, and especially Ruskin High School again. So to help sum up the parking piece, what this really starts to tell us is that Ruskin High School really needs some on its parking lot, along with a few of our other elementary schools. The next question that we posed was activity areas and equipment. So these would be your playgrounds and athletic areas around the district. So you can see here that those graded out fairly well. I will say that at Urban Elementary, this project was, or this site was looked at by the district. And right when we released this, we were opening up a brand new asphalt playground and playground area for the students. We think that this one may have gotten a few of the teals and the orange comments on the far right early because remember, Irvin used to be for our youngest scholars, right? So that was a pre-K building that was now turned into an elementary school. So now we went from playground equipment that was specifically made for those younger students, and we were asking some of our older students to play on it and those things. Well, the district saw that as a need and has gone in and since fixed that issue. So we think that if we were to re-ask that question at Irvin, we would get a much different result. Moving on to some of our what we call MEP, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing comments and questions. The first one we ask here is just about heating and cooling. So the comfortable building environments. Is the building comfortable? Is it the temperature and humidity and a comfortable space to learn in? And so you can see here that this one pretty much throughout the district did not get a lot of those greens and blues. We were more towards the average, needs improvement, needs major improvement, almost as a whole across the district. And this is not something, again, that would be surprising to Mr. Weekly, our facilities director, and myself. We've been tracking this for quite some time in terms of some aged out HVAC that we're looking to possibly replace as part of this next bond issue. Indoor air quality. So this one speaks directly to the quality of the air within the environment. So that could be do our exhaust fans work and make sure that we're exhausting some of those smells that come from restrooms, or do the food smells linger in the commons, cafeteria areas for a long period of time, you know, after our lunch shifts are completed. So on this one, it actually did not score too awful bad. We had a lot of averages, and there's things that we know we probably need to go in and look at. Again, schools like Ruskin High School did score pretty far to the right-hand side of the graph, with 11 people saying that it needed major improvement, 6 people saying that it needed some improvement. So this is one thing that didn't score too bad, but it's something that we're going to kind of keep on our radar as we move forward and make sure that we can kind of push these numbers up as we go. Access to electrical outlets. We asked this question very specifically because I know that the district has a very robust technology piece. They have some one-to-one, and when you do start to make that transition into a more digital age, the access to outlets and electrical power for charging and staying connected seems to be something that needs to be looked at quite often. So here we ask the question is just how is the access to your electrical outlets on a daily basis? And it did not score too bad. We actually got quite a bit of comments of it was average, right? It's serving its purpose. You can look at Burke, Compass, Dobbs, you know, for a majority of those that answered that question at those sites, you know, it seems to be serving its purpose. Some that we may want to look at might be Urban that said, hey, it needs some improvement, you know, because we got 8 responses there in that teal color. And then again, Ruskin High School, we tended to get quite a few of that needs some improvement or needs major improvement to access to electrical outlets. So that's something that we will look at. Indoor lighting levels. So this is a question that we ask very specifically because indoor lighting levels and indoor lighting was changed out as part of the last bond issue that we completed in 2016. So as part of that project, we had a contractor go in and not necessarily change out the actual fixtures, but they went in and replaced all of the light bulbs to new LED light bulbs throughout the district. So this question was more of a gut check. How did we do? How is that working 4 years later? And then how are things going today? And you can see here that we pretty much got an average or above on almost every location, including Ruskin High School. I know we got a few that maybe need some improvement or needs major improvement, but the majority of our responses were average and better. So that gold, blue, and green colors pretty much throughout the district. So this is just a good gut check for us to see, you know, were people really taking this seriously when they answer the questions? And then how did we do? And how is this paying dividends to the district 4 years after the last bond issue? And so this was good to see that we got positive results and positive feedback on our indoor lighting levels. So the next question that we ask is about our guided entry sequence. And so the guided entry sequence is where a visitor would come to the school, they would be able to enter the school, but not have direct access to the school or the students. So what this would look like would be you would enter the building, you would come into a vestibule, and from that vestibule, you would be only allowed to enter into an office or to an admin or a space where you are then checked in. And once you have been checked in, then you are allowed to go into the building. We do have this at a few of our schools, including Smith Hale Middle School right now. We do have this function set up. And I can tell you right now, I was a little bit surprised when I saw the results to these questions, because we don't necessarily have that guided entry sequence in a formal capacity really at any of our buildings. But as you can see here, we tended to get a pretty good set of feedback in terms of, people were pretty happy with the way the entry sequences and the security piece was being handled by the district. So that speaks volumes to the logistics on how the district is handling those visitors and the people that come to our buildings on a daily basis. And people do tend to feel safe as that is being done. So I give kudos to the district for not having those secure vestibules and that guided entry sequence set up yet, but it looks like you guys are doing a great job in terms of security and safety at those entry points, because we tended to score very high in terms of the numbers on the guided entry sequence. So kudos to you guys as a district on that one. Security for athletic fields and playgrounds. So this is more directed towards fall protection at our elementary school sites. So around our play equipment, we do have either mulch or the thick rubber pads that if a student were to, say, fall off the slide, they would land on those rubber paddings for fall protection versus maybe falling onto concrete or asphalt or something like that. So the second part of this one was just fencing around the sites. And so making sure that those play areas are fenced in and the students would be safe and secure when they go outside to do their outside activities, whether that be for PE or gym class, or it's just a daily recess routine that they get to do on a daily basis. So you can see here that a lot of our sites graded pretty well. Truman Elementary School, you can see down there, got 8 in the teal and 5 in the needs major improvement in that orange color. And I will say that the fire department of Kansas City, Missouri came in a few years ago and asked us to remove some of our fence panels for fire access or egress. That is something that we have decided to approach them about. We will be talking about being able to secure our sites around the playgrounds as we move forward. So we will be looking at making sure that we have continuous fencing and safe playgrounds and safe sites for all the students. ADA accessibility. So this is something that we looked at and addressed a little bit in our last bond issue, and we know that we still have some work to do. But as you can see, the district really graded out very well as a whole. Most buildings, this would be for entry points, access into the building, and not only to the building, but within the building. So for instance, at Ruskin High School and Smith Hill Middle School, this would be for our elevators to get our visitors and our students from floor to floor if they need that assistance. So the district really graded out pretty well as a whole. As you can see, not a lot of negative feedback there. We did have some comments that, we did look at some improvements at Smith Hill Middle School during the last bond issue. We were able to accomplish some of those, but not quite at every entry point. So we will be going back through this process and making sure that we look at each and every entry to the buildings, just making sure that all entry points are all inclusive to all of our visitors. So that is something that we are doing and will continue to do. So the next few questions that we asked were about our educational spaces. So in this one, it was a question of, are there a variety of learning spaces within your facility? And we got pretty decent feedback. So a variety of learning spaces, and what do we mean by that? We get a little bit deeper into it on the next few questions, but this would be, do you have the ability to take large groups or small groups and take them maybe outside of the classroom, traditional classroom space, and get them into a slightly different learning environment, just because we know that some students learn a little bit differently than others. Some may learn just fine in a large group environment, and then some may need to maybe break out and be in a smaller group with some more one-on-one attention. So this question was asked, do you have that variety of spaces within your building? And you can see that we got a lot of pretty decent responses here. On the positive side, Urban Elementary School would be a good example of, we only had one of our responses say it needs some improvement, but overall it seems like there are a variety of spaces there. As you move down to Ruskin High School, again, you can see that there looks to be a desire for some additional variety of learning spaces as we got a lot of needs some improvement or needs major improvement compared to our other responses. This is a question that also is a follow-up from our previous bond issue in 2016. So this would be for storage for student and teacher materials. This is the ability to have casework and areas to store student and teacher materials inside the classrooms or inside the building on a daily basis. And it was something that we looked pretty heavily at during the last bond issue, but it just fell short of making the priority list because we had so many other needs that became a higher priority. But you can see here that a lot of our buildings grade out as pretty good. Some do need some help, it appears. If you look at Compass Elementary School, the third one down from the top, seems to be a pretty strong response there that we need some assistance at Compass. And then again, similarly, when you go down to Ruskin High School, we had quite a few responses there that were below that average in terms of the ability to have storage for student and teacher materials. So again, that could be bumped up on our priority list quite possibly. So this dives a little bit more into the question that we talked about a little bit ago in terms of a variety of learning spaces. And so what we wanted to do is ask this question, the same question in a little bit of a different way. So this one asks you as a community, as a staff, do you have small group instruction areas? So this would be the ability to take a small group of students, usually 10, 12 less, and go to a location within the building and be able to do some more one-on-one or smaller group learning within your building. And so, again, we got quite a few good responses here. Not too many that we got negative feedback on. Even Ruskin High School, we had a few teachers and community members that thought we could have some more, but you can see there that we had quite a few responses in terms of average and good. So I think that may be more of a departmental type question that we would dive a little bit deeper into at the high school there, just to see which departments or which areas within that building could use a little bit of assistance in these small group instruction areas. Next, we ask about large group areas. So do we have the ability to have, large group instruction or gatherings? So this would be, maybe we have a teacher that is just a rock star at teaching math, right? And so maybe 2 or 3 classrooms want to come together and let this rock star teacher just do their thing, just knock it out of the park with a large group of students. And so this would be that ability to take larger groups and bring them together in a learning environment. And so it looks like we got a lot of good feedback on this one too. Irvin Elementary School knocked it out of the park with lots of goods, grades, and averages. And that's kind of holds true all the way down to, we got a little bit of negative feedback at Ruskin on the below average side. So that may be, again, something that we look at where it looks like we had quite a few people said it was good. So maybe there's 1 or 2 departments within that high school or wings within that high school that we need to look at to see if we can bring those numbers up and accommodate some more large group spaces in some areas of the high school. And this one is a question for appropriate spaces for the instruction and age of our students. So this would be, is the building that you are living in appropriate for the students? And overwhelmingly, we got a very good response here. Seems like there was very little feedback on that below average side, so that needs some improvement or needs major improvement. We tend to be from the gold bars to the left. So all of our schools seem to be functioning very well for the age group of the students that are within those buildings. So that is very good to see. The next part of the survey, we broke down some of the open-ended comments that we were given. So we allowed the community and the staff to give us just some open-ended responses, open-ended comments on areas that are needing improvement. So as we go through, we took some of the feedback that we got and we really culled it down to the ones that came to the top, right? So areas that do need improvement by the staff said that the auditoriums, classrooms, restrooms, and gymnasiums all need improvement. For the restrooms, it was not only the number of student restrooms, but also the staff commented that they would like to have additional staff restrooms or private restrooms or single restrooms within the facilities to be used. On The patron side, the community basically said that the commons cafeteria areas all need some improvement. Restrooms again, so you see some commonality there with restrooms. Auditoriums, so you saw that commonality there, and that refers to the auditorium at Ruskin High School. So we got a lot of comments from staff and community and the patrons on the auditorium. And then music and electives. So there seemed to be a good fine arts representation in our patron group for that online survey that we took. The next question we asked, because we wanted to stay on that positive side as much as we can, are what are some areas that are in good condition? And so the staff gave us some feedback. You know, as a whole, administrative offices, they're all in pretty good condition. Our media centers, our libraries and media centers are in good condition. And then throughout the district, the special education rooms came up a lot in terms of, you know, they're adequate, they're in good condition, and they serve the needs that the district needs. The patrons made comment that administrative offices were good. The media centers were good, so you see some commonalities there. And the third one that popped up from our patron group was that the hallways are nice. And that's pretty common. A lot of our visitors do visit these locations on a regular basis. You know, when they come to visit, they walk down the hallways to get to their son or daughter's classroom or to where they're going. They probably are in the media centers quite a bit. And then they also, when they come into the buildings, they're in those administrative offices. So these are areas that the patrons are familiar with, and they got good scores. So the next one we talked about was spatial needs. What areas are maybe too small for their current function? And we asked for some feedback on that. So the staff basically scored all areas pretty well when it came to spatial needs, except for they did ask for some additional restrooms. On the patron side, the major comment, the common theme on a lot of our feedback was the commons and cafeteria areas are too small. A lot of the comments there basically read that they're full. I think when parents come to eat with their students, maybe they just see that they are pretty full when they're there visiting, and that's why that comment came up quite a bit. So we did kind of a word collage here on the top needs for the district. So instead of trying to cull through and try to pick out themes, what I did was I took all of the staff and the patron comments, blended them together, and then put in here in a word collage, you know, some of the hot topics and the keywords that popped up. So the larger the word and the darker towards the purple, the more it came up. So you can see there that parking lots were a very, very, very high piece. Facilities, space, classrooms, HVAC, heating, those were all hot topics that came up. You can see there in the middle of the screen, students came up quite a bit, which is very, very good. I was happy to see that. That meant that the students were in a lot of people's comments. And that meant that they're looking at this through the students' eyes, right? What would benefit students? What would make the classrooms better for the students? What would make learning environments better for the students? And I saw that a lot. So it was good that people were directing their comments more in that direction. So this is a slide that has been in all of our presentations thus far. So this was in community forum number 1 and number 2. I expanded it a little bit for this evening, and I wanted to share with you why. So safety and security, this would be, so these are some of the critical conversations that we have had at the facility vision team meetings, at our leadership meetings. And these are some of the hot topics that we've identified as your professional, as your architect and engineer. As we walked around the building, some of the things that we had noticed. So safety and security was one of the top items that we had looked at. If we were to go in and complete all of our secure entries, give you all that guided entry sequence at all of our buildings, we're estimating that could cost around $6.8 million. If we were to do all of the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning work that the district has identified, that we've identified through our long-range plan process, we would be looking at somewhere around $13.2 million. Building infrastructure was another very hot topic that came up quite a lot in our online surveys in terms of aged buildings or older buildings, or, you know, people had the desire to increase the appearance from not only the interior but the exterior, that curb appeal of the building. So I added a few items to this number. I think previously I showed this number as just a $20 million lump sum number that included, roofs, parking lots, some masonry repairs, and some other miscellaneous items that we had put in. But I wanted to break that down for you guys a little bit more. So if we were to go in and do all the roof repairs that we have identified, we would spend about $12 million. Parking lots would be about $4.9 million. To do all the masonry repairs, $500,000. Flooring needs, $4.9 million. If we were to upgrade that student and teacher storage, the casework that's in the building, so that would be the cabinets, the countertops, and all of that's in all of our buildings, that would be about $4.9 million. If we were to go in and take down and replace all the ceilings around the district, it'd be about $7 million. And then if we were to go in and paint the inside of all of our buildings, hallways, corridors, classrooms, restrooms, et cetera, it'd be about $1.5 million. So that kind of encompasses some of the things that were commented on very specifically within the feedback that we got through the online forum of ceiling replacement was a hot topic, painting of the building was a hot topic, flooring was a hot topic. So that's why I added those in very specifically under the building infrastructure, which did expand that $20 million. You can see that adds up to quite a bit more than that now, but they were specifically mentioned within the surveys, and I wanted to make sure that I brought that to light this evening just to help bring that forward and let you guys know what those dollar amounts are. Fine arts, we have identified about $3 million. That would be to upgrade the auditorium at Ruskin High School and to look at some of the other fine art spaces being music, orchestra, band, those kind of spaces. And then we've identified around $11.3 million worth of potential projects for athletics. So that could be turf replacement, concession stands, grandstands, a press box, athletic storage areas, just various projects throughout the district, tennis courts, those kind of things that we have looked into. So the key on this slide, guys, is that remember we're looking at $30 million of a no tax increase bond issue. If you add all of this up on this page, it goes well beyond $30 million. So these are the items that the district has identified, that the community has identified through our meetings, through our online surveys of potential projects and topics that they want to see some work done in this bond issue. So that's this slide in kind of a nutshell. So that brings us to the next kind of stage for our process. So I closed the surveys yesterday morning, and that kind of ended, soft ending to the gathering of data for our information. So now we feel that we have a pretty good idea of, through our site visits and tours and assessments that we have done and we've kept up over the years, and now also the new feedback that we've gotten from the 200 and almost 300 patrons and staff members. We have a good section of data to go from as we start to build our options. The next part of the long-range plan process after the gathering of the data is now exploring some options. What are ways that we can start to prioritize and break down how we would like to allocate buckets of money for our $30 million no tax increase bond issue that we're going to look at in August. So I'm going to throw out a couple options for you guys for consideration this evening, and then I'll kind of open it up for comment. They're three very different, and I will explain them as we go. So here's option one for our no tax increase bond issue for $30 million. We start off with looking at doing about 1/3 of the roof improvements that we had identified. Look at doing about 1/3 of the HVAC and plumbing improvements. So that would be restroom improvements, drinking fountains, and HVAC equipment throughout the district. About half of the needs that we've identified for parking lots. Secure entries, left that in there holistically so that all sites would have those guided entry sequences and secure entries. Fine arts, allocating about $2 million to that project for fine arts and the Ruskin Theater. Looking at about $1.8 million in athletics. So that would be taking the Ruskin gym, doing some renovations in there. The locker rooms that are on either side and down underneath are concrete bleachers, renovating those locker rooms, and then also looking at turf for the football soccer field. It is in dire need of some assistance, so we left that in there on this one. Looking at some interior improvements. So we go through and we would selectively replace ceilings throughout the district. Some of maybe the worst ceilings we would prioritize and look at that, and then painting throughout the district on the interior of our buildings. Exterior improvements, modernizations. So this is one of the comments that was brought up a lot that I was telling you in terms of the look and the feel and the curb appeal to buildings. So how could we do this? Well, it may be going in and fixing up some of the masonry, maybe adding canopies or replacing some windows or adding some metal panel to the buildings, maybe some signage or graphics. We don't know what this is yet, but if we were to allocate some funds to this to help that curb appeal of our buildings throughout the district, I'm saying that we could spend about $2.2 million and make a good dent in that scope of work and start to modernize and make the buildings on the exterior a little bit more modern. And then the last one was turf playgrounds. So going in to each of our sites and adding turf and some additional fall protection and updating and upgrading some of our playground areas. So the key component here is that we're feathering out that $30 million and we're hitting a lot of different topics here, guys. So we're basically getting interior improvements, exterior improvements, athletics, fine arts, secure entries, parking lots, HVAC, and roofs. That's the key. We're giving a little bit of money to all of the different priorities that came up through the bond issue. One thing to discuss here is that I don't know that I would ever recommend doing all of our roofs or all of our HVAC or all of our parking lots in one bond issue. That being said, here's why. If we were to go through and spend a really large chunk of money to replace all of our roofs, let's say we spent all $15 million on roof improvements, in 20 years or so, all those roofs are going to go out of warranty all at the same time. And so in 20 years, the district is going to be on the hook for another large balloon payment of projects that's going to come due. So it's kind of important to feather these out as we go and help to spread that big chunk of money, help spread those funds out and not encumber a very large debt over one scope of work if we do not have to. So there's a few ways that we can do that. We can literally go in and we can replace equipment or roofs at each one of the buildings. So for example, we could spend $400,000 at Burke, $200,000 at Compass, $400,000 at Dobbs, $400,000 at Ingalls, and so on, and do work at all of our facilities. Or we could in turn focus and do all of the site. So we would replace all of the roof areas at Burke, all of them at Compass, and only do 1/3 of the district. So there's two ways you can look at it. Do some work, about 1/3 of the work that's required at all of our buildings, or focus in on certain buildings and do all the work at individual buildings. So that's something that as we get more into the details, as we start to refine some of these options, those are the things that we will get into. So to recap, option one, it allocates a decent amount of money or a good amount of money and feathers that out across several different topics that were brought up through the online surveys and our assessments. So moving on to option number two, this one's a little bit different. So on this one, we stuck with about 1/3 of the roof improvements, but we bumped up our dollars for HVAC, and let's say we do about half of those improvements. And if we did all of our parking lots, which were in some need, we kept all the secure entries. We updated, or we upped the amount that we would be spending on fine arts. So let's say we did the Ruskin Theater, the band, choir, orchestra rooms, etc. We bumped it up to $4 million in this one. Athletics, we bumped it up also. So this would be the Ruskin Gym, the locker rooms, and turf, as we discussed. But we added in another $400,000 to bump this number to $2.2 million to do some updating and renovations to the concession stand at the football field. So what that means is when you give more money to certain projects, other projects, that money's got to go away, or you have to prioritize a little bit. So let's say we spent more on fine arts, athletics, security, and infrastructure. That means maybe we're not going to get to do as much on this model for interior, exterior improvements and playgrounds. So you can see those went to zero because that money then got shifted to other priorities on the list. So that's the major difference on option number two. This would be more for infrastructure, fine arts, and athletics. And then I wanted to flip that a little bit on option number three and show you what we could potentially do if we went the other way, right? So what if we didn't do as much roofs? What if we didn't take care of as much plumbing and HVAC? And what if we kind of went back a little bit on parking lots back down to $2 million? So we're spending less on that building infrastructure piece, yet keeping the secure entries at the $6.8 million. Fine arts doing just the Ruskin Theater. Athletics, we're only going to do the turf, so no locker rooms, no gym renovations, just turf. But we really focused a lot of dollars on interior improvements, so taking care of about half of all the flooring needs and casework needs within the district. That could total about $9 million. And then bumping up that money a little bit to do exterior improvements. And then again, the $2.8 million redoing all of our playgrounds around the district. This one is a little bit different. This is kind of looking at it a little bit backwards. My opinion on this one is a little bit different just because I would be afraid moving forward by allocating so much money to our interiors when we're not taking care of the exterior envelope of buildings. And I say that as your architect in terms of, you know, if we go in and we renovate all these classrooms, yet we do not take care of our roofs and our windows and our masonry and the building envelope, and it's not weather tight, we're still going to be changing out ceiling tiles, and we're still going to have roof leaks, and we'll still have other issues that could potentially cause damage to some of the work that we're doing on the interior renovation piece. So we want to make sure that, you know, we try to allocate as much funds as we can to making those building envelopes and buildings comfortable and dry and weather tight, and having safe parking lots, drop off, pickup, etc. As we go. And so this one is just another option to show you a potential way to spend it, just focusing more of those dollars on the interior versus the exterior and what that could be. So with that, I believe, just to give you guys, I told you guys that we are in the explore options phase. So here we are exploring options in step number 3. We will move through this and then be moving into defining the plan. So defining the plan is as we start to reach a consensus, whether it is option 1, 2, 3, or hybrid of, you know, these aren't final options, right, guys? These are just things that I've thrown out there for our consideration for this evening, just to start the conversation. We can take option 1 and make a hybrid of it. We can blend option 3 and option 1. However you guys direct me to do it, I'll start to work towards that. And then we'll move into step 4 here pretty quickly in terms of prioritizing that. So we'll take kind of the option or blend of options that you guys direct me to move forward with. And then we'll start to work on detailing that out very specifically on what the work would be at each location and what we would be doing at each school in terms of roofs, parking lots, interior, exterior improvements, etc. as we go through. And that would be more of the defining of the plan. Our ultimate goal here is to step 5. We have to meet that date of May 21st to take our final plan, the one that we want to move forward with, the one that we want to go to the bond council with and get approval from the state to go onto the ballot in August. So that's the ultimate goal that we are working towards. And right now, I think we're well on our way to meeting that schedule. I think we're in a pretty good place right now. So with that, I will open it up for comments, questions. So make sure that you unmute your microphone and then state your name, and I'll try to do my best to answer any questions that you guys may have.
Justin, we had a question while you were talking about playgrounds, I believe. Sorry, I'm just trying to scroll back up. Oh, the concession stand, the cost for the concession stand.
Yeah, so we had allocated, I see that question there. So we had allocated about $400,000 to improve the concession stand. So that would be to go into that concession stand, redo some of the toilets, partitions, and then upgrade some of our food serving areas that we had looked at. We also have some plumbing needs that we need to address out there in terms of the water service that is to that building. So that would be a high priority item that we would look at moving forward also. We had one question about the total amount of needs And I can tell you guys that we have identified, I think it was about $180 million worth of overall needs once we got all of the data gathered. And if we were to do anything and everything that came up on our list, we had about $180 million worth of things identified. And again, remember that we only have around $30 million. We have $30 million for this bond issue. So now it's going to come to the prioritization piece. Yeah.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
This is John Sharp. About how often or how frequently will we be able to do these no tax increase bond issues as we retire the bonds we have out there? Will that be about every 3-year cycle, 5-year cycle? Could you give us some thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are planning now. So as part of our long-range plan process, not only are we planning for the potential no tax increase bond issue, Mr. Sharp, for August of this year, so 2020, but also looking at going for potential bond issues or planning for that long-range plan piece for 2024, 2028, and 2032. So we're going to plan out, take all of those $180 million worth of needs and try to figure out on a priority basis what we could do on a every 4-year cycle. So this year we know that we have $30 million of no tax increase. We're looking at potentially around $15 to $20 million of no tax increase availability in 2024 to potentially do projects. Again, another $15 to $20 million in 2028 and so on. And so it would be on about a 4-year cycle, just as we are now. So this is the second cycle. So we looked at that in a very similar light back in 2016, where we did a bond issue for $17 million in 2016. We're now going for $30 million in 2020. And then we will plan for what we could potentially do in 2024, 2028, and 2032. So yeah, about an every 4-year cycle is what we're looking at right now.
Well, if we can stay on somewhere near that cycle, it would make sense to me to split up the roof work and the HVAC work, where you are going to be on track to really upgrade all of the roofs and the HVAC systems, which are terribly outdated for the most part and inefficient, but not, as you said, not do it where they all come due at the same time 20 years from now, but spread a little out each time. But I think those kind of improvements not only make the environment in the buildings more comfortable and save energy, which is a goal for this country, but I think it can save a lot of operating costs, because some of these systems we have now are so inefficient they seem like they're running all the time. And that's a terrible cost to the district. But if you put in new energy efficient HVAC systems, you put in a new roof, and if we consider looking at solar panels and some of these big flat roofs we have, I think that the solar panels could generate a lot of our electricity, and between the solar panels and new HVAC systems, you're saving money in the budget that can then be spent on the direct education of the children. So I would sure think it would make sense to look at that pretty strongly, and you don't want to put solar panels on a roof when you're going to have to replace the roof in 2 or 3 years, but where you do replace the roofs, that would be the time, I'd think, to look at solar panels for those buildings.
Yeah, correct. That is one of the benefits of our HVAC and plumbing improvements is those projects, you're right, Mr. Sharp, they do have a payback. So the older equipment that is in place now runs at less efficiency than some of our newer equipment, meaning it costs you more dollars to run that piece of equipment to heat and cool the building than a newer one would. So if we were to take those units out, the utility bills, and Ms. Nicole Williams would be happy to hear this, those utility bills would probably decrease, and those systems are easier to control for the district. So you can set those set points and have more control over those buildings to make the environments a little bit more comfortable for the students on a daily basis. So they have a lot of benefit to those. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Justin, I am multitasking. I want to make sure that you saw one of the questions about when will we be done developing the plan. Did you already get to that one?
Yeah, I kind of covered it a little bit Go back. So that was the slide where we had talked about taking the option and some of the feedback that you guys give tonight on a potential option, right, or a blend of options. And what we'll do is we'll take that and start to go into defining the plan pretty quickly now in terms of, if you guys give us feedback this evening, which we want to hear from you guys in terms of whether you put it in the chat or you speak up, that's however you would like to do it. If you liked option one, where we kind of feather out those funds and give a little bit to each one of our priority items that had come up, or we focus more on infrastructure or more on interior and exterior improvements. We'll take that direction, and then we'll start to dive deeper in and define that plan. And that is where we start to look very, very in detail about what projects could happen at each one of our sites. So we can start to really hone in on that, and that'll probably happen within the next 3 or 4 weeks. So that defining the plan process will happen in the month of April. Yep.
Yes, Justin, this is President Briggs. First of all, thank you for answering my question.
Yes.
We have over 45 participants on the line today. If we don't get enough questions or feedback today, what is another mechanism can we use to draw feedback from the audience or from the community?
That's a good question. So there's a couple ways we can do it. If we don't get a lot tonight, what I can do quite possibly is put the 3 options out on, I could create another quick survey, put the 3 options up on a survey and leave that open for a week or so and gather feedback that way. That might be a good way to do it. Just an option that has worked for us in the past. So
we can also, we're planning to put this meeting up on the website, and we can ask people to review it, and they can always send feedback. We've been asking for feedback sent to us via email for anybody who has it. Yeah, so whatever you think is best.
Hey, Justin, this is Vice President Reagan.
Mr. Reagan, how are you?
Briggs? I'm doing great. This question is from Mrs. Teresa Edens. She had a total of 2 of them. The first one was, does the district still own Union Point? And the other one that she asked is, does the district no longer have a summer paint crew? Because you was talking about the painting and all the painting inside of the district. So that was one of her 2 questions.
Yeah, so I'll let Mr. Weekly answer Union Point. I'm not sure about that, but I do know that the district does do continual maintenance, being painting and upgrading of all the sites, and Mr. Weekly might be able to fill us in on that a little bit too.
We have not had a paint crew for the last 4 years in the district. We use some of our custodians during the off-time periods like Christmas break or spring break or long holiday weekends, things like that, to do some painting. Also, we supplement that painting on occasion with some of our grounds crew folks, but we have not had a summer crew painting group for I know 3 years, and I think it's been 4 years. As far as Union Point, it's my understanding we still do own Union Point at this point.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, any more questions?
Well, can I go ahead? I don't want to ask another one now. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mr. Sharp. Floor is yours.
Well, I just wanted to make one comment. I'm not trying to hog this thing, but everyone should know that the city has approved their budget for this coming fiscal year starting May 1. That was approved by the council on a 12-to-1 vote. And that does include the recommendation that we made from the Public Improvements Advisory Committee. I'm on that committee. I represent Councilman McManus. And we did recommend $240,000 to help with the cost of new turf there at the district field at Ruskin High School. So that has been approved by the council, and that would be in addition to the money the district spends on that. But as long as the district approves the project, there is $240,000 available from the city.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. We did get
Yes, sir.
comments, in terms of we had a response this evening that said I'd focus on roofs first, playgrounds for elementary, and then fine arts. Our air conditioning needs to be addressed. We have to deal with the exterior before we can beautify the interior. So that's a very good comment. And then we have one that said from a teacher at Ruskin, I believe that extra academic learning environments at Ruskin would truly benefit the academic achievement. Could that be implemented into any of these plans? Absolutely. Yep. We can definitely look at some of those academic areas. I can put that into one of our options that we start to explore. So very good comments. Any more comments from the group? We would love to hear from you guys this evening. If you guys have any thoughts on option 1, 2, or 3, benefits, pros, cons, whatever you might have, we would be happy to entertain, your comments or some questions. Yes. So while I'm gonna pull back up my presentation real quick. We had a question to run through the timeline again real quick. So I will get back to that and share that back with you guys. So here's our timeline one more time. So we are just now into the beginning of April. We're going to start prioritization of work. So we're going to start exploring options and then really drilling down and defining the plan of what those options would really pertain up with. And then so here we are, April 2nd at our community meeting, number 3. We will give a finance and facility meeting update sometime in the middle of the month. And then if we're still doing board meetings, we can give an update to the Board of Education coming up in about a week. So that's where we are for the month of April. In April and May, we'll move to step 5, and that's starting to adopt the best plan. So we'll come back to you guys with the information that we take and we start to drill into in terms of defining that plan. We'll start to bring that back out, ask for some more feedback. And then in May, towards the end of May, we would like to adopt that best plan and move forward as we go. So that's the timeline.
Okay, Justin, this is President Briggs again. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Great, great. There will be a meeting in April. Donna can confirm the date, and so it would be nice to have an update at that time.
Absolutely.
Mr. Justin, this is
Yes,
Vice President Reagan again. And these are some questions by Mrs. Edens.
Yes.
I'm trying to get you to look at it, but here's 2 of them. One of them was, why is moving buildings and grounds not being considered? Meaning the building and grounds. I'm hoping she's meaning building and grounds, and
Right.
it's been on the table since 2010.
Yes.
And I guess that would be a Mr. Weekly. And then she also states, if the district owns Union Point, why aren't we keeping it up? It is a historic building and could be a moneymaker for the district. And her third question is, you writing them down? You see them in the chat, right?
I don't see them in the chat, but I can answer the first 2.
Okay. And then the last one would it be cheaper to have a summer paint crew? It used to be, made up of teachers back in the day. So those are the 3.
Okay. So the first one, I can say that we have looked very diligently into relocating the facilities out off of Martha Truman Road. We've looked at several different ways in terms of not only doing additions and renovations to the site that we currently have, but we've also looked at the potential of moving it to the Compass site. So at Baptiste, there is the football field that's down low. We have a plot of land that leads out to that road to the north that we could tie into. Right now, that has a fairly hefty price tag, and right now the idea is to focus as many dollars as possible to building infrastructure and student learning environments. So that's kind of how that one has come up and kind of washed out to this point. Not that can change, obviously, but the idea right now is to take as much of that $30 million no tax increase bond issue and not necessarily spend it on facilities and grounds, but to focus those monies and those efforts on the students and the staff for HVAC roofs, all the things we talked about this evening. And then maybe Mr. Weekly can help us with the paint crew question and then the using of Union Point, because I'm not too familiar with that or those.
The Union Point building, I've been in it a few times. It's incredibly unsafe and would take an incredible amount of time and money to renovate that facility. Plus, I believe it's in the historical society, so we would have to follow certain guidelines and in renovating that facility. And right now, with no students in that facility, it would take away from renovating spaces that really need to be geared towards kids. And as far as the paint crew goes, I'm not. What I understood is that it was college students or former Ruskin students that were going to college that came back and did 2 weeks of summer painting. That was what was described to me as the summer crew in the past. We have not explored that since I've been here. Well, even before I was here, it went away several years ago, even before I took this position. And I think some of it had to do with cost and had to do with who would supervise that crew and who's going to, when many of those people are already assigned to other duties. So we can certainly look at that and see what the cost feasibility of that would be and who would supervise them and guide them in that process. But we could certainly look at the feasibility of it.
Okay. This is President Briggs again.
Yes, ma'am.
A year and a half ago, the district had an initiative where we closed schools down and we moved some of our elementary students into our Irvin school. And now we're finding that we're going to have to do some renovations to Irvin due to us having bigger children in the school. What are we doing based on a demography study to ensure that we're not renovating schools that, as we stabilize stabilize our district and attract more students to our district? I want to make sure that we're not pouring dollars in places where we have to come back a year or two later to modify to meet the needs of our students. So how can we ensure that the bond money that we use this time around is best used for a longevity purpose and not have to go into our general fund to fix a school, that we're not just putting Band-Aids on things.
Right, and that's a great question. So I think that question for those of you that are familiar originates with Urban Early Learning Center that was specifically created for some of our youngest learners, our pre-Ks and Ks. That was a dedicated facility that President Reagan or President Briggs had just mentioned did turn into an elementary school this year. So now we have not only some of our younger learners, but we have third, fourth, and fifth graders as well. And that building was not necessarily designed nor set up for those older students, meaning we have toilets in there that are a little bit smaller for the smaller learners that may not be as accommodating to some of our older students. That's one thing that we have talked about in ways that we can update that facility in terms of going through, and maybe you're doing some of the graphics that were more geared toward literacy and learning to read and learning to do math, upgrading some of those in areas of the building to be more accommodating to those third, fourth, and fifth graders and what they would see as good learning graphics. Updating the restrooms to have the larger restrooms in them, some things like that. I think moving forward, we do not have anything on the docket right now that would be very specific to very specific age groups. So right now, moving forward, all the projects that we have looked at or identified would be more geared toward all-inclusive. So if it's an elementary school, it would be geared toward K through 5, or if it's pre-K, it would be for pre-K. and middle and high. So we don't have any unique opportunities identified right now in this bond issue, or even in some of our long-range planning efforts to do a very unique, very specific set of renovations geared toward one age group. So fortunately, President Briggs, that is not something that is even on our radar at this time. So all the projects moving forward would be more all-inclusive to all students at different age levels. So.
Excuse me, not to interrupt this current inquiry or answers, but the one thing, Director Watry here, I want to ensure that, well, I really don't have to really ensure. I want to ensure that we're taking an equitable lens when we're looking at our schools and all of our buildings. There are, although Urban has been recently renovated, there are other buildings within the district that are a little bit more dilapidated. I think Mr. Sharp spoke on HVAC systems, and I know that Dan is very well aware of which buildings has more of the equitable need, and I know that we're focusing on certain areas, and usually those areas are the areas that are most at the forefront of, I would say, what is seen in our district. But I also want to make sure that our buildings are functioning to the point where the children can be successful in the environments that they're in.
Yep, and that's a great comment. Just me being me, and when I broke down option number one, where I feathered out the different topics, right, and gave a little bit of funds to each of our planning criteria that were brought up during the planning process and the surveys that we put out. Director Watry, I actually went through and just did a hypothetical what if, and for HVAC and plumbing, you're absolutely right. There are some buildings that don't really need much in terms of HVAC. Those would kind of be Santa Fe or Millennium. It got a lot of that HVAC work done in our last bond issue as part of that renovation of that school. So I have $0 really going to HVAC at Santa Fe. Yet on the flip side of that, at Truman Elementary, I have almost $600,000 of funds. So what that does is it really starts to do exactly what you said. There is a bit of a parity of need on the different topics that we talked about. So those wouldn't necessarily be allocated, equally to every building. They would be focused on some of the buildings that needed more attention. Would get more dollars for certain projects, certain specific topics. So yeah, and I can give you a quick rundown. For HVAC and plumbing, I had $500,000 at Burke, $175,000 at Compass, $450,000 at Dobbs, $450,000 at Ingalls, $0 for HVAC and plumbing at Santa Fe. I had $550,000 at Truman, and so on. So that's not equally allocated. It is allocated based on the need that we saw in that building to bring that parity from site to site up as a whole throughout the district. So, yeah.
Hello, Justin.
Yes, sir.
This is Vice President Reagan again, and one of the questions that was in the chat was about the solar panels. That came from one of our viewers, and then my question also is with lighting and security. Was the lighting for all our buildings, because our lighting around our buildings is not very great. Was that something that was put into the security area, or where is that put in?
Yeah, so exterior lighting would be part of that $6.8 million that you saw as part of our security upgrades. Some of our exterior lighting was upgraded in our last bond issue as part of our improvements. So we did go in and put some LEDs into some of our parking lots and things like that for exterior lighting, but we didn't quite take that all the way. So there is some need left for that lighting piece. And then what was your first question? Oh, the solar panels. So we did some quick checking on solar panels, and right now the payback on solar panels isn't as high as it once was. There still are some rebates and some things like that out there that we think are available if you do go to solar, but our utility costs here in the Kansas City metro area are not high enough right now to justify or offset the longevity and the payback that you could get for solar panels. So why that is something that we'll continue to keep on the table and continually look at. Right now, your payback on the investment in solar panels isn't as high as it once was due to rebates and other things like that were once available. So right now, we're kind of leaning a little bit away from the solar panels as an energy savings option, and maybe looking at doing better HVAC equipment or lower usage for water on toilets and sinks and faucets and flush valves that we select for our restroom innovations, those kind of things. And that will give us a better payback for the investment of our dollars moving forward. Yeah.
Also in the chat, this Vice President
Yeah,
Raymond,
Lord.
there was, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Oh, okay. Also in the chat, there was something that was stated about the selling of B&G building, and they said, was that an option? It was in the chat, and I don't know
I
who's
don't
looking
know
at our
that
chat.
I don't know that we ever talked about selling the buildings and grounds building. If we did, it was part of a potential relocation of that facility. We couldn't just sell that and not have one. So there could have been talk over the last year, 2 or 3 about, vacating or selling the land that it's currently on and moving it to another location. But as a whole, selling it for profit would not be an option because the investment that we would have to make on a new facility would most likely far outweigh the profit or the funds that we would receive from selling the existing facility, if that makes sense.
It's not just the profit.
One of the questions that we have is, are there any plans to address issues with Dobbs not having restrooms separate from students? Yes, that was one thing that we looked at in terms of our plumbing and HVAC, and that was a comment that was made by a lot of our community and a lot of our staff when they made comments in terms of not only our restrooms for students, but single or smaller restrooms or individual restrooms for staff and visitors. So that is something that that we have looked at and do have budgeting price for. So.
Can I say one other thing on solar?
Yes, please.
I don't think we ought to view it as, well, we either do HVAC or we do solar. I think we probably need to do both. And I realize our electric rates haven't gone up here recently as much as they have in some parts of the country. But particularly if you have a change of administration at the national level, I think you're going to see a major change in some of the energy policies of this country, particularly things like fracking, which many of us think are pretty dangerous. And I just don't think we should count on having pretty stable electric rates in the future. I think they're going to continue to go up. So I'm not saying solar ought to be a priority over putting in more energy efficient HVAC systems. I really think we ought to look at both those things. But I do think some of our facilities would be ideal for solar just because they have all these big flat roofs and a lot of sunlight. And solar panels have gotten a lot cheaper. They have gotten a lot lighter where they don't put a heavy load on the roof. So when you are doing roofing, it might be, I just think we ought to at least look at that as one of the components of energy savings and trying to cut our energy costs down, because I think we all know we're spending way too much money on energy now than we should if we had energy efficient system, if we had efficient systems, and if we had secure building envelopes.
Yeah, understood. It's not something that Mr. Sharp we're going to take off the list. Just
Yes,
right
sir.
in terms of prioritization, it's down
Yes, sir.
just because of the payback and the potential. Now, if you're right, if we do have a change of administration and there is a flip in utility rates and or there's a major development in the power that we can gain back from solar panels that's a lot greater than what it currently is, and it makes it more enticing for us to move towards that, that's definitely something that we would look at. But right now,
Yes, sir.
yeah, like we say, we had $180 million worth of needs, and we're really trying to prioritize that and give the district the best bang for the buck on everything that we can do moving forward. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Yep.
I have to say that I think it would also set a good example for the kids if we went with solar to make them think more about the environment. And the board at one time did agree that that was one of the things that they wanted to pursue.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Was that a question by someone?
No, that was a statement.
It was
Oh,
a statement in terms of we
There
should
was-
still look at solar because it is important. It's something that we've looked at in the past, and so.
Hey, Justin, Director Watcher here. I wanted to ask a question. As far as, and this kind of, I guess, goes also to Dan. As far as accessible space,
Mhm.
I think in the more of we have space that's being used. Like for instance, one of the spaces that's being utilized through like CAC is using the building at the end of the Ruskin Field. But if and they work a lot with the families that are in our district, if that space is too small for them, or if there is availability for expansion through the renovations in which we're doing, would that? I guess the question is, will after this consolidation of things being done with the plans interloping every 3 years, is there going to be excessive room for possible expansion for our community resources that are utilizing our spaces?
That's a good question. Mr. Whitby, you want to take that one first?
Well, I mean, the only community resource we have right now that is doing that, besides Link, that is actually using our buildings, but is CAC.
Okay.
You know, that's certainly, we entertained that several years ago, and then the CAC folks decided to stay where they were. We actually were talking about using part of one of our buildings, and that didn't come to fruition at that time. So we're certainly open to talks at any time. We certainly want them to be serving our families in the best way possible, because certainly they're serving our families and others in the Southland, and so certainly we're open to that. It's just where and when and you know, what's the right space to do that, so we're not moving them on a consistent basis for the needs of our students. And I think that's what becomes really difficult, is, you know, what space can they be long term? And I think obviously the CAC folks want that. We want that. We want a long-term plan for that, so we're all feel comfortable with what that looks like. So, Rachel, I know Miss Casey, she was on this call earlier. We have not had long conversations about expansion of any kind as far as into our buildings. We have a little bit, but nothing that has been solid as of yet as far as acting upon it at this point. So we just had good conversation so far.
Justin, this is Mr. Reagan again,
Yes, sir.
and I'm sorry. I see one of our directors, Director Abram. He wants to know how flexible learning spaces. Have you all talked about that in any other renovation plans, and is it an option?
Yeah, so that goes back to that question that we had talked in the survey in terms of you know, large group, small group, appropriate learning spaces for the students. Yes, so we have talked about those flexible learning spaces in terms of spaces that can be used for different or a variety of things throughout the day. So we haven't really drilled into exactly what those are yet. We have just identified that there is some need at some of our facilities for, you know, those learning environments for smaller groups or larger groups, or that can change or morph throughout the day. So we have talked about it. We don't have any very specific, you know, detailed ideas about what could be done at Truman Elementary or at Ruskin High School or anything like that yet, but it is something that we have discussed and talked about. Yeah.
Okay, I know that we have 2 buildings that are open, and this might have something to do. I know that everybody has been talking about the CAC, and I know that we do have Simonton and Johnson that is open at this time for that. I know that if that was a possibility, that would be some money to renovate those buildings because of they're just sitting there right now as eyesore. Is that correct, Mr. Durham, Mr. Justin?
Yeah, I believe the buildings are unoccupied right now.
And then my other question is because I've looked at some of our ramps and for the disabled, what category would that? I don't want to say it in the wrong form and manner. So if I offended anyone, if that's not the right term, I want to make sure that I didn't say it right. But my question is for this is that looking at some of our ramps, elevators, and things in our schools, What did that fall under for that in that category?
Yeah, so some of those would fall under our safety and security. So as we start to look at those secure entries and some of those entry points throughout the building, not only would we need to address, that guided entry sequence where you come into the building, check in at the office, and then you're allowed to be in the building. We would look at the approaches to that. So the sidewalks that lead from the parking lot, from the ADA parking stalls to the sidewalks that lead to the building and then into the building from there. So those numbers would fall underneath that safety and security piece. Yep.
And I want to piggyback off of Vice President Reagan's comment with as it relates to ADA. I want to make sure that we're also taking a look at the accessibility from the school to the athletic facilities, ensuring that people who are physically challenged, not just students, but staff and community stakeholders have access to our athletics facilities, and that the school is meeting the most up-to-date ADA requirements.
Yep, and that's a great comment. So I can answer that question pretty specifically. So in our parking lot and sidewalk improvement numbers for Ruskin High School, we have an all-in number of around $800,000. That would go in and fix all of our parking lots, sidewalks, etc. That seems like a pretty big number, but you're right, President Briggs. When you start to look at all of the sidewalks and all of the access points and all of the parking lots at Ruskin High School, that $800,000 all-in number will go pretty quickly. So that is something that when we look at a site, we'll make sure that we look at all of those sidewalks, whether they're from parking lots to buildings or from buildings to athletic areas or playgrounds, and from those athletic areas and playgrounds out to the parking lot. So we'll make sure that we look at those buildings holistically. Yep.
Mr. Justin, this is Mr. Reagan again. I'm sorry that we're saying all the questions, and hopefully everybody that's out there can chime in also. But also going to some of our elementaries. Our elementaries schools are being used as cafeteria, also vice versa, the auditorium, and all that. And I think you spoke about that as far as the cosmetic part. Is that what you were talking about when you were talking about cosmetics inside of the buildings, trying to distinguish cafeteria from auditorium? Because those buildings are such, as we all know, are very, very old. So I know that those were some of the things. And then my second thing is that I'd asked you, and I don't know because I came in late, how much would it be to build a new school?
Yeah, so your first question was the gymnasiums and kind of their current multi-use purpose, right? So we have talked about that a little bit in terms of, our cafeterias, our common spaces within each of our schools, our gymnasiums. Cafe gymatorium is kind of what I call them, kind of to be funny, but they're a blend of they're a heavy use, high use area every day. So we have our PE and our gym classes in there in the mornings. We transition, we set up lunch tables. We have lunch in there. Once lunch shifts are done, those are all broken down, cleaned up, and we go back to PE again in the evenings or the afternoons to finish out school. So those gym spaces, those cafeteria spaces do take a lot of work during the day. One of the things that we had talked about was the potential to maybe do additions at some of the schools to where we do a gymnasium addition, right? And that frees up the ability for educational space to take place all day in the gymnasium, and then it frees up so you're not having to tear down and set up and clean up and do the cafeterias as much and as quickly on a daily basis. So we did look at that. Currently, if we do a gymnasium under Kansas City, Missouri code, those gymnasiums will have to be what we would call an ICC 500 rated structure. So they can withstand a 250 mile an hour wind, right? So they're more of our high wind shelters. Those get to be very pricey. So you're looking at $2 or $3 million per elementary school to go in and do something like that. And that starts to eat away at a lot of our dollars that we would then allocate to other things. So again, that is on our radar. It's something that we can look at and discuss. But in terms of priorities right now, it just wasn't one that was really high on the list. That goes back to one of the questions that we asked the staff and the community in terms of, are the spaces working okay within the buildings? Which ones are too small or not working? And the staff basically said all of our spaces work. I mean, we make them work. They perform well, except for restrooms. And that goes back to some of the comments that we've heard not only in our group chat today, but in some of the questions and comments that we got in the survey of, we just need some additional restrooms, not only student restrooms, but also some staff restrooms. So we will continue to look at those gyms. They are on our list. I just don't know that they've floated to the very top right now to make that high priority piece right now.
Right. And just this is President Briggs. This is my last question. I promise you.
Sure.
And I understand that based on the survey, you may have received feedback that the spaces are working good. When I walk into the gymnasia, cafeteria, auditorium, it pains me when I'm seeing kids play kickball and almost run into tables. Is it possible to maybe create a storage facility off of the cafeterias so that those tables can be placed in storage, a storage unit instead of sitting right there that's in close proximity? An example would be Dobbs. An example would be Ruskin. I mean, another example would be Santa Fe. I mean, they're sitting right there and kids are playing kickball, running into the tables. I mean, there's no way that should be even aesthetically acceptable or even acceptable to any stakeholder. I mean, those tables have to be put away, and we should be thinking about at this time a proper storage unit for our equipment if we're not going to build gymnasiums.
Yeah, that's a great, what I would call a hybrid response right there. So maybe we don't go all in and build new gyms at all of our sites, but maybe we can carve out some space within the existing facilities, or maybe do smaller additions to create table storage. And we do that in a lot of our new facilities. It just wasn't something that was done in the area of the buildings that we currently have in Hickman Mills. So in our newer buildings, the ones that we rebuild, which goes to your question, Mr. Reagan, in terms of a new school, but so that is something I will put that on the list. I will add that to our wish list, because I think that is a good hybrid solution in terms of maybe making that set up and tear down and clean up, and then also after our lunch shifts, and then also freeing up some space within our multi-purpose areas for the students to play. That's a great comment. A new school, Mr. Reagan, it kind of depends on the size you want to go for. Just completed an elementary school here in Kansas City, Missouri, 52,000 square feet. It came in at over $20 million. So if we were to look at doing something like a brand new elementary school, we would have the cost of tearing down one of our current schools that we have, and then building on site would be probably our best option. And that would be in the $20 million range, probably $20-25 million, depending on the square footage that we settled on, number of classrooms, et cetera. So yeah, they are pretty pricey in terms of compared to the allocated money that we currently have of $30 million. It would monopolize a lot of those funds.
This is Teresa Edens, and I just need to make a couple of comments. I don't think there is anybody in this entire community that can does not believe how important the kids and their education is to me personally. But I do have to say that as long as all we're doing is renovating school buildings, we will never get anything else done. That is an ongoing issue. You're never going to have everything finished. There's always going to be something else to do. In the meantime, Buildings and Grounds is sitting out there. At one time, the city of Grandview wanted to buy that property. It's not just considering how much it would cost to move it inside the district, but you've got to consider the amount of gas that is expended and the amount of time it takes for people to drive out there. Buildings and Grounds used to be at Hickman Mills Drive and Bannister, so it needs to be somewhere more centrally located. And as far as Union Point goes, that is the only one, it is one of two still standing of the original kindergarten buildings, and it's the only one that this district still owns, apparently. And yet it's just left to fall down. If that could be renovated, that could bring in money in the form of field trips from other school districts, because there is, it would be a one-room school, and there are so many things that could be done. science-related things that could be done around that building that would bring other school districts in on field trips. So I think that at some point, those other things just have to be considered.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Eden.
Mr. Justin, just to piggyback off of President Briggs. I'm sorry, President Briggs. Even though we are thinking about maybe adding on some type of storage rooms for those cafeterias and tables and things of that nature, please do not. I hope we do not never bring those big old storage units. That is an eyesore also. So if we're thinking about building, let's build. Don't bring no more of those back to our district anymore. That is just so of an eye thumbs. It's just ugly. That's the best word to say. It's ugly. And for somebody, we're renting something when we can build our own. Hopefully that, maybe you said that you closed the thing today, correct?
Yeah, I closed the survey yesterday. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Justin, Director Watry here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for being able to answer all these questions, as well as be able to entertain us with the information that's needed in order to be able to make moves forward. Can you hold on a second? But more of a comment than a question. When it comes to this bond, I know that we're going to be kind of looking at the aspect of renovating or not so much as renovating every 3 years, but addressing a bond every 3 years. With the plans that have currently been in place, I noticed that with the bond that happened, what would it have been 3 years ago? Am I correct?
Yeah, we started that last bond in 2016, and it ended about a year and a half ago. Yes, sir.
And with that, within that bond, a lot of renovations and money was put into places where, given the time frame, and especially of what happened last year, us consolidating the district, where some of the money that was spent from that bond went to some of the locations in which we've kind of stopped using.
Yes,
I believe Johnson was $1.6 million was put into Johnson. So
yeah, we did. We spent money at Johnson and Symington during the last bond issue. Yes, sir.
So I guess this is more the comment. Although I know that we're kind of geared towards renovation, but it's more in the sense of just more or less upkeep to be able to provide an environment that's best for our children to learn in, whether it's through security, where security doesn't necessarily look like security.
Right.
Making sure that it's renovated to look as if it's a welcoming environment that is secure rather than a secure site.
Right.
Right. But knowing that you and Dan, as well as the plan that has been put into place, I really appreciate you putting the time and allowing the community to be able to speak on this.
Yes, I appreciate that. And your comment about safety and security and having that appearance, right? That's one of the toughest things we do for safety and security is to provide a safe, secure environment for students and staff, but not make it look like that, right? So a lot of our safety and security solutions do come up with a lot of glass, a lot of transparency. It's not just, active ability to stop an intruder or whatnot being, steel doors and things like that. We use a lot of passive techniques in terms of visibility, glass. If you can see a threat coming, it gives you fair warning, those kind of things. So when we do our safe and secure and our secure entries and things like that, there's a lot of transparency and other passive ways that we look at doing that to make it look inviting, make it look nice and beautiful and have that great curb appeal that we want. but also still be that safe, secure environment. Yeah, it is a very delicate balance of that. And it's something that as we move forward, we'll work through that with you on how best to balance that piece with you guys. It's a bit tricky to do sometimes.
Hey, Justin. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm sorry. When you was talking about the curb appeal, I noticed that we're still on our signs for our schools. When we look at our other neighboring schools, can we get rid of those signs? Is that and go to the more electric signs that schools have for their like, hey, I'm coming up here. We're still in prehistoric. Is that part of your curb appeal also?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one thing we could look at in terms of the modernization is signage and those kind of things. I will tell you that right now we're struggling with Kansas City, Missouri, the city allowing us to do some of our marquee signs. Those are the signs that maybe have a video board or a message that we can digitally change that cycles through. Some of the districts that I have the opportunity to work with, it's totally fine. Independence is okay. Parts of Raytown are okay, but the schools that are within the Raytown School District that are in Kansas City, Missouri, we cannot have those signs. So, they're kind of split within their district because they have some Kansas City, Missouri schools. They have some schools that are in Raytown proper. So it really boils down to what the city will allow us to have and pull a permit on in terms of that signage. We can get creative and do all sorts of fun things and make our graphics very unique and appealing and awesome. But when it comes time to having some of those marquee signs that you see around with other businesses and other schools within other districts, I know that there's been a lawsuit that's going on with the city and things like that. I just don't know where that stands. It's been going on for quite some time, and I just don't know that we'll be able to accommodate those new marquee signs like you just discussed. That's really kind of out of our hands. We'd love to provide them, but it's something that Kansas City, Missouri has just not allowed us to do right now.
This is Teresa Edens again, and I do have to say that while there may be some people in the area who support the digital signs, overall the community as a whole is opposed to having digital signs, and they have gone to City Hall and made comments opposing them.
Yes, ma'am, I would agree with that. That's kind of the feedback that I've heard from some of the city feedback that we've heard is there's been a little bit of pushback from some of our patrons in terms of having those marquee signs. Yep.
This is John Sharp, and those aren't allowed now in residential zoned areas, and I doubt that changes. But I certainly appreciate having this session and being able to have input, and I do hope as the board is defining exactly what will be put on the ballot, that we continue to look at upgrades to our athletic facilities, because many of our students do get athletic scholarships, and I think more could, and that's certainly something that for a lot of our students can make the difference on being able to go to college or graduating from college with a mountain of debt, or having their college pretty much paid for when they graduate. It certainly helped my son, and who's a Hickman grad, and he didn't get a full ride, but that athletic scholarship sure helped, and every penny of that was a penny we didn't have to pay back. So I do think our student athletes deserve first-class facilities.
Agree. Thank you, Mr. Sharp.
My last comment of the night. I know that while we have some community members here, I would like to thank Dr. Cargile for sitting in, and I would like to thank our current interim superintendent, Carl Skinner, for being here as well. I know he hasn't said much, but I appreciate you guys sitting here and listening in, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so Justin, you and I can chat about getting the plans out to folks and getting some additional feedback.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll say thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. We appreciate all the feedback.
Yeah, I will say this.
Thank you.
one of the best turnouts that we've had for our meetings. So thank you guys for taking time out of your evenings and the comfort of homes and wherever you may be to join us this evening. We do appreciate it. All the group chat comments, all the comments tonight were fantastic. This is exactly what these forums, these community gatherings are for us to kind of voice our concerns, our opinions, ask those questions and get it out there so we can all kind of see where all of our priorities are. So thank you guys very, very much. We do appreciate it, and have a great evening, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Goodbye.